In the middle of the gorgeous wedding hall, my future daughter-in-law leaned in and whispered in my ear, "You are just low-class trash." She had no idea that I was already holding the contract for the fake parents she had hired. "Hello there, my friends from afar. I am Michelle. You know, after getting through the darkest days of my life and rebuilding everything from the ground up, all I ever wanted was a bit of peace with my children and grandchildren. But life sometimes throws challenges at us that we never see coming, right in the middle of my own son's joyful day. The wedding music is still echoing in my ears, but the coldness in Stephanie's voice still cuts deep into my bones. Before I tell you about that fateful day, could you help me out by hitting the like button or leaving a greeting? How is the weather where you are? Here in Arizona, the sun is still very harsh, but sometimes the human heart can be colder than the middle of winter. Thank you for listening to this mother's story. Now, let us go back to the moment where everything began to fall apart. I stood there, right in the heart of a magnificent ballroom in a Phoenix hotel, still clutching the wedding envelope I had prepared so carefully for my son and his new bride. The navy blue silk dress I chose with such pride suddenly felt tight, like it was pressing the air out of my lungs. Stephanie approached me with a radiant smile perfectly crafted for the cameras, but her eyes were as cold as a desert night. She leaned in close, the scent of her expensive perfume filling my senses, a fragrance that couldn't mask the cruelty in her voice. She whispered right into my ear, asking if I really thought I belonged here. She called me low-class trash and told me that my trashy past would always make me inferior. The world around me just went silent. My heart tightened into a hard knot, and a sharp, stinging pain raced down my spine. I stood there frozen, feeling like every bit of breath had been stolen from my chest. She pulled back, that flawless smile never wavering for a second, and casually turned to chat with her high society friends as if she had just commented on the weather. I looked over at Tommy, my son, who was laughing and glowing with happiness across the room. He had no idea that the woman he was about to call his wife had just driven a jagged blade into his mother's heart. My legs started to tremble inside my Skechers, the shoes I usually found so comfortable, but now they felt like they couldn't even hold me up. I felt so incredibly small and out of place under those shimmering crystal chandeliers. The way Stephanie could be so heartless and then just act like nothing happened made me realize this wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was a complete betrayal of every ounce of love and hard work I had poured into this family. I managed to slip away from the crowd, finding a quiet, dark spot on the balcony just to try and breathe again. The dry desert wind brushed past my face, but it did nothing to cool the burning heat of shame and anger rising in my chest. Out there in the shadows, the memories of the last 12 years started rushing back, as clear and vivid as a movie playing in my mind. I couldn't hide from it anymore. I was forced to face a truth I had been trying so hard to ignore for a very long time. Sitting there alone in the quiet dark, my mind drifted back to those grueling early days of my sobriety. It was a time of endless work, from scrubbing floors as a cleaner to taking the lonely night shifts at local hospitals. I pinched every penny and gave up every little comfort just to build what I have now. $22 million poured into 8 recovery centers. I did it all for Tommy, so he could have a life of security and never have to walk the rocky path I did. I paid for the luxury vacations and the college funds, and I never once said no when Stephanie came to me with her hand out. But sitting here now, the pattern is so painfully clear. Stephanie only ever called me when she needed a bigger budget for the wedding, or when there was a new designer bag she just had to have. I remember so clearly the time she asked me for $50,000 for a charity gala. claiming it was to help women in need. I was so moved back then, thinking my son had finally found someone with a heart of gold. But as I piece it all together tonight, I see that she never truly cared about the patients at my centers. She looks at them with the same cold contempt she just showed me. That deep sadness of being pushed away by my own son is starting to harden into a cold, steady anger. I have sacrificed far too much and fought way too hard to be standing here at 60 years old just to let a fraud like her trample over everything I built. The truth tastes as bitter as the medicine I had to swallow during those first years of getting clean. I finally see that I let my love for my son cloud my judgment for way too long. Stephanie does not love Tommy. She loves the financial safety net I provided for her. I saw that same greedy glint in her eyes whenever the topic of my legacy came up. I whispered to myself that enough was enough. I am not going to sit back and let her pull the strings of my son's life for one more second. My dignity and my painful but proud past are not things for her to mock. Right then and there, a firm resolve took hold of me. I was going to peel back that perfect mask and see what was really underneath. The next morning, I did not wake up feeling like a wounded mother. I woke up with the raw instinct of a woman who has stared death in the face and fought her way back to life. I needed a clear head, and I needed to start this day focusing only on myself. I had to recharge my spirit for the storm I knew was coming. I started my day with an early morning walk through the park near my house. The Arizona air felt so fresh and crisp, carrying that sweet scent of wildflowers and the damp earth after a late-night desert rain. I stopped by Kohl's, a place I usually go to pick up little things for my grandchildren. But today was different. I bought myself a beautiful new notebook and a pen that felt just right in my hand. I even treated myself to a long breakfast at my favorite cafe, something I had not done in months because I was so caught up in every little detail of Tommy's wedding. The sheer freedom of not having to hear Stephanie's constant complaints about class or style was like a weight being lifted off my heart. I took out my phone and called Sarah Williams, my best friend and longtime business partner. Sarah has always been the voice of reason in my life. When I told her what happened last night, she did not even sound surprised. She told me she had noticed those little red flags for a while now, but did not want to overstep my boundaries. Just hearing her voice and reconnecting with an old friend brought me so much peace and a sense of being grounded again. I did not feel like I was standing all by myself in this fight for the truth anymore. We made plans to meet up and talk about what comes next, and for the first time in weeks, that heavy burden on my shoulders finally started to feel a bit lighter. I sat back on a stone bench and started writing the very first lines in my new notebook. It was a list of everything I needed to do to protect myself and my son Tommy. I realized right then that I have a whole village behind me, from the dedicated medical staff at my recovery centers to my friends in the community. Why should I be afraid of someone who only knows how to use words as a weapon to hurt people? A strong sense of faith in justice and the truth began to rise up inside of me. I decided I would not respond with anger. Instead, I would let the very evidence Stephanie tried so hard to hide do the talking for me. But that moment of peace did not last very long. As soon as I walked through my front door, my phone started buzzing. It was Stephanie. Her voice had changed completely, sounding so sweet, it was almost scary, as if those cruel insults from the night before had never even happened. My dear sisters, have any of you ever dealt with someone like that? Someone who is all smiles to your face but stabs you in the back the moment you turn around? At my age, I am just so tired of those kinds of performances. What do you all do when you have to face a person who tries to pull your strings like that? Please leave a comment and share your thoughts with me. In this hot Arizona sun, hearing from you all is the best comfort I could ask for right now. I was sitting in my favorite lazy boy recliner, letting the soft leather cradle my aching back while I sipped on a cup of herbal tea. The desert evening was quiet until my phone started vibrating on the side table. It was Stephanie. When I answered, her voice was so thick and sweet, it was like she had swallowed a jar of honey, which was a chilling contrast to the venom she had spat at me the night before. She started acting like a concerned daughter, asking if I was taking my vitamin D and calcium supplements because she worried about my bone health. I could feel the familiar knot of tension tightening in my chest, a physical warning that she was laying a trap. I kept my voice steady and brief, my eyes drifting down to my Kindle Paperwhite, where I had been reading about finding inner peace and self-worth. I knew this sudden display of affection was just a warm-up for whatever she was really after. After a few minutes of that hollow small talk, the mask started to slip just enough for her to reveal her true intentions. Stephanie began to play the part of the struggling victim, sighing deeply about all the unexpected costs that had popped up for the wedding. She went on a long tangent about how her charity foundation was hitting some hard times because of the way the economy has been shifting lately. She started hinting that, as the successful mother in this family, it was really up to me to step in and save the day so Tommy wouldn't lose face in front of his new friends. I took a deep, grounding breath and felt a new kind of firmness growing inside me. I told her very simply that any further financial support from me would need to be handled through a completely transparent review. There was a heavy silence on the other end for a second before she tried to pivot back to guilt, reminding me of all those years I was absent from Tommy's life during my struggle with addiction. That old game of manipulation just did not have the same power over me anymore. I have worked way too hard to heal my life and my relationship with my son to let her use my past as a weapon against my bank account. I told her calmly that my past mistakes were not a reason to hand over the keys to my life to someone else. Her tone sharpened then, getting that thin, jagged edge back as she told me how disappointed Tommy would be if I didn't cooperate. I didn't flinch. I politely but very firmly cut her off, telling her that I would handle my conversations with my son myself. When I finally hung up the phone, a surge of genuine confidence washed over me. I realized I had just taken my first real step in breaking free from the emotional grip she had held on me for so long. I looked out my window at the bright Arizona sun, and even though the heat was still intense outside, my heart felt light and cool. I knew I had just held my ground in the first real test of our relationship. I picked up my new notebook and started jotting down exactly what she said, so I could share it with Sarah later. I knew I had to stay sharp for whatever was coming next. I also decided right then that I would head over to Home Depot tomorrow to pick up some new motion sensor lights and high-definition security cameras just to make sure I felt completely safe in my own home. That phone call confirmed one thing for me. Stephanie was never going to stop her games until I drew a very clear, hard line between my kindness and her sense of entitlement. My newfound firmness seemed to have pushed Stephanie to her breaking point. I know a woman like her doesn't just walk away when she feels her grip on someone else's hard-earned life slipping through her fingers. The silence that followed for the next few days felt like the heavy, still air right before a massive desert storm hits. I could feel it in my bones that a much bigger confrontation was brewing, and it was going to happen right here in the one place I always considered my sanctuary. My own home. The scratching sound of a key in the lock sent a jolt of pure terror through me that made my heart feel like it was going to drop right out of my chest. Before I could even set down the old ceramic mug I was holding, Stephanie burst into my kitchen without so much as a knock, acting like she owned the very ground I stood on. She did not bother with a greeting or even a look of respect. Instead, She started screaming at the top of her lungs about how I had the nerve to refuse her request for money in front of my son Tommy. She looked me dead in the eye and asked me who I thought I was, calling me nothing but a former addict who had no right to act superior or give her life lessons. I could feel a hot, white rage bubbling up from my feet and surging straight to my brain. This house was my sanctuary, a place I had spent years of back-breaking work to afford after I got clean, and I was not about to let her stand there and spit on my dignity in my own home. I set my mug down on the counter with a heavy thud, my hands shaking with adrenaline, but my voice came out as cold and sharp as a desert winter. I started listing every single sacrifice I had made for Tommy over the years, from the long nights to the millions of dollars I had poured into making sure he had the best life possible. I reminded her of every time she had ignored the flowers I sent, and every time she had used that sweet fake voice over the phone just to insult me behind my back. Stephanie did not show a single ounce of regret. She just leaned back and gave me this hollow, ugly laugh, throwing out lies and accusing me of being a selfish mother who was only trying to destroy my son's happiness for my own ego. Every word she threw at me felt like a jagged stone hitting my face, meant to bruise my soul and make me feel small. I finally reached my breaking point and shouted for her to just be quiet, letting all those years of swallowed hurt and silence explode at once. I pointed my finger straight toward the front door, telling her I was done listening to her lies. When she realized she could not manipulate me with her words anymore, her true, raw greed came clawing out. She screamed that it did not matter what I did now because all of my property and assets would belong to her and Tommy eventually anyway. She looked at me with such hate and told me I was old and did not have much time left anyway, so I might as well give up now. That comment felt like a physical slap across my face. She was standing in my kitchen, openly waiting for me to die, just so she could get her hands on the legacy I had built with my own sweat and tears. A wave of pure disgust rose up in my throat as I realized this was not just some simple family drama. This was a direct attack on my very existence. I walked over to the front door and threw it wide open, letting the Arizona heat spill into the room. I told her to get out of my house immediately, my voice so calm and steady it even surprised me. Stephanie glared at me with eyes full of pure venom as she stepped out onto the porch. She did not go quietly, though. She turned back and threw one last threat over her shoulder, telling me I would regret this day and that I would never lay eyes on Tommy or any grandchildren she might have. When the door finally slammed shut, the silence in the house was deafening. I collapsed into my chair, my whole body trembling and feeling as weak as if I had just fought a physical battle for my life. But even through that bone-deep exhaustion, I felt a flicker of something strong and unyielding. I knew then that there was no going back. I had to move forward and protect myself and everything I worked for before she could do any more damage. I sat there in the growing shadows of my living room, my breath still coming in short, ragged gasps. Stephanie's screams seemed to echo off the walls, making the home I loved feel violated and cold. I looked around at the pictures on the mantel and the furniture I had picked out with such pride, knowing that the safety I once felt here was completely shattered. I knew right then that I could not wait another day to change every single lock on the doors and get those security cameras installed. I could not allow her to ever have that kind of access to me again. That heavy feeling of fear was slowly being replaced by a very clear, very solid plan of action. I needed to call a professional lawyer first thing in the morning and start building a wall of legal protection around my life. That night, sleep was impossible to find. Every little creak of the floorboards or rustle of the wind against the windows made me jump, my nerves completely frayed. I realized that my sense of security was gone, and I could no longer rely on just my emotions to get me through this. I had to be smart, and I had to use the law to draw the line that Stephanie refused to respect. As the sun started to peek over the desert horizon the next morning, I was already dressed and standing outside the lawyer's office, ready to take back the control of my life that I had almost let slip away. I started my morning at the office of an attorney who specializes in protecting the rights of seniors. We sat down and went over the paperwork to revoke the power of attorney I had once given to Tommy during a moment of weakness. The lawyer was very thorough, explaining every legal step needed to stop any outside interference with my bank accounts or my recovery centers. I felt a deep sense of focus as the fear from the night before began to transform into clear, calculated actions. I handed over all my documents, from my bank statements to my business contracts, making sure there were no loopholes left for Stephanie to exploit. After that, I went straight to the bank to open a completely new account and moved the majority of my personal assets there. The bank staff was so helpful and patient while I explained my need for heightened security. I also made sure to cancel all the old credit cards where Stephanie had secondary access. Holding that new card in my hand, with a PIN code that only I knew, brought me a strange sense of comfort. I realized then that I had been far too relaxed with my personal finances for a long time, and that lack of boundaries had unfortunately allowed greed to grow. The next step was making sure my home was a safe haven again. I had a team of technicians come out to replace every single lock with smart, secure ones and install a full 360-degree camera system around the property. Watching them work through the app on my phone made me feel like I was truly rebuilding my own sanctuary. I also had them set up motion sensor lights in the hallways and the bathroom to prevent any falls, which is something I worry about more these days. My house does not just feel like a building anymore. It is a protected space where Stephanie no longer has a way to get inside. Finally, I took a step that was painful but absolutely necessary by cutting off all digital contact with Stephanie. I blocked her phone number and all her social media profiles. I sent a short, honest email to Tommy, letting him know about these security changes and telling him that my love for him has never changed, but that I simply need peace in my life right now. I told him I could no longer subject myself to insults or manipulation. Pressing that block button gave me a powerful sense of relief, like I was finally closing a very dark chapter of my life. That evening, I sat in my living room and watched the different camera angles on my tablet. I could feel the safety returning to my home with every breath I took. I took my blood pressure medication and my daily omega-3 fish oil supplement, realizing that my health is just as important as my financial assets and needs just as much protection. Things are starting to feel like they are back under my control. I know this journey is not over yet, but I have a solid defense in place now. I am ready for whatever comes next, because I am no longer that passive woman just standing by while my dignity is taken away. While I was busy protecting myself, kindness showed up from a place I did not expect. It turns out the noise from the argument the other night did not go unnoticed by the people living around me. As I was standing out front watering my flowers, a familiar face from the house next door walked over with a look of genuine concern and a few kind words. Mrs. Martha, who has been my neighbor for 10 years, stepped across into my yard carrying a tray of warm brownies. She asked if I was okay because she heard the noise from the night before and her eyes were filled with such genuine worry for me. I invited her inside, and for the first time, I really opened my heart and shared what Stephanie had been doing. Martha took my hand, and her aged hands felt so warm and steady. She shared that she had gone through a very similar situation with her own ex-daughter-in-law, and she told me I should never feel guilty for standing up for myself. Her kindness felt like a soothing medicine for my soul and helped me feel less alone. Later that afternoon, Sarah Williams stopped by to check on me. She brought a folder of papers and a look of absolute determination on her face. She told me she was not going to let that woman hurt me any further. Sarah said she was ready to testify about my mental capacity and my clear head if Stephanie ever tried to say otherwise to the authorities. Having Sarah there gave me so much logical strength, and I realized right then that I was no longer alone in this struggle. I have real friends who love me for who I am, and not for the assets I have. We all sat out on the balcony together, watching the sun go down over Arizona. Martha, Sarah, and I were three women who had walked through many of life's highs and lows together. We laughed about our old habits and talked about our faith and our shared values. This feeling of warmth and connection helped me see that goodness still exists, even in the middle of a storm. I felt so grateful for these relationships because they are the spiritual strength that makes me even more determined to show the truth about the person trying to tear my family apart. Having the support of my friends gave me the courage to start cleaning up the things left behind from Stephanie's time here. I decided to tidy up the living room and the leftover wedding gifts that were still sitting there. And it was right then, while I was going through the layers of expensive wrapping paper, that I found something that will change the entire situation. My dear sisters, have you ever felt the strength that comes from the understanding of friends like Martha or Sarah? At our age, a kind word at the right time is more valuable than gold. Who do you talk to when things are hard at home? Please leave a comment and share your stories with me, because your words are a comfort to me right now. I was tidying up the side cabinet in the living room, a place where Stephanie had temporarily tucked away some of her designer bags and folders after the rehearsal dinner. Underneath a stack of thick, glossy fashion magazines, I spotted a plain brown envelope with no name or return address on it. Curiosity got the better of me, and as I pulled out the contents, I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. It was a formal contract from a staffing and talent agency based in Los Angeles. The header was unmistakable, stating it was a contract for professional talent to provide family services for a wedding event. It listed specific actors hired to play the roles of her parents and extended family, with fees reaching into the tens of thousands of dollars. And every single page was signed by Stephanie herself. I could hardly believe my eyes as I realized the entire high society background she bragged about was nothing more than a carefully staged theatrical production. A wave of pure disgust washed over me as I kept reading the printed emails that were clipped to the back of the contract. Stephanie had given these actors specific instructions on how to interact with me, telling them to make me feel small, outdated, and inferior at every turn. She actually referred to me in writing as a blind funding source that needed to be managed. They were even discussing a timeline for how to slowly move in and take over the management of my recovery centers once she was officially married to Tommy. Every single line was damning evidence of a systematic and cold-blooded scam. Her whole identity, from her prestigious career to her family tree, was one massive, calculated lie designed specifically to strip me of everything I have worked for. I immediately grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of every single page, sending them straight to my lawyer and Sarah. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone, but my mind felt sharper and clearer than it had in years. This raw, ugly truth wiped away every last bit of doubt or guilt I had been carrying. She was not just a difficult person to get along with. She was a professional predator. I realized then that all those times she called me low class or inferior were just part of a calculated strategy to break my confidence so she could control me more easily. This was the secret weapon I needed to protect my son and my legacy. I ended up sitting right there on the floor, surrounded by the physical proof of her deceit. My heart broke for Tommy, knowing he was head over heels in love with a complete illusion. But at the same time, I felt this strange sense of relief. Everything finally made sense now. All those little gaps in the stories her relatives told at dinner. The way things did not quite add up. Now I had the answer. I knew I could not let this performance go on for another minute. I had to prepare myself for a final confrontation where I would drag her lies out into the broad daylight for everyone to see. The sheer weight of this discovery left me feeling completely drained. I needed a place to find my center and draw strength from my roots before I took the next step. I grabbed my keys and my sweater, driving out toward the cemetery where my husband is buried. I needed to sit with him for a while, to feel the presence of the man who walked through the hardest days of my life by my side. I needed his quiet strength to guide me through the storm that was about to break. The cemetery was so peaceful this afternoon, with just the soft sound of the wind whispering through the branches of the trees. I sat down by Robert's headstone and placed a bunch of white carnations there, the flowers he always loved so much. I whispered to him that I was facing a huge challenge right now, and I needed to feel him near me. I closed my eyes and let my mind drift back to those years when we were young and had almost nothing, but we always had so much love and honesty between us. Robert always used to tell me that our dignity is the one thing nobody can ever take from us, unless we decide to hand it over to them ourselves. The memory of his deep, warm voice and the feeling of his rough hands brought me such a strange sense of comfort, and it started to melt away that cold feeling of betrayal that had been hanging over me lately. I remembered all those long nights he stayed awake with me while I fought through the physical pain of getting clean, and how he never once stopped believing I could recover even when the rest of the world had turned their backs on me. He is the reason I found the grit inside myself to build this life and my recovery centers. He taught me how to stand up for what is right, not with anger, but with a quiet resilience and a sense of self-respect. I could almost see him smiling in my mind, like he was passing a torch of determination back to me right when I needed it most. I simply cannot let the legacy we built together or the love we poured into Tommy be stained by Stephanie's lies. When I stood up to leave, I felt a new kind of energy flowing through me. That heavy, sad nostalgia had shifted into a very calm and steady kind of peace. I am not afraid of Stephanie's threats or whatever Tommy might misunderstand anymore. I know in my heart that I am protecting my family's honor and the very values Robert left behind for us. My steps felt much more solid on the dirt path as I walked back to my car. I am ready for whatever tricks they try next because I know I am never truly alone. The power of love and the truth are walking right beside me. But Stephanie would not let me stay at peace for very long. She realized I was changing, and she started a much more wicked attack, one that went beyond just money and aimed right at my mental health and my freedom. One morning, the doorbell rang, but it was not a friend standing there. It was a public official holding a stack of legal papers for an interrogation. I froze in place when I saw a woman in a sharp gray suit holding a clipboard standing right at my front door. She introduced herself as an agent from Adult Protective Services and told me they had received a very concerning report about my mental health and my ability to care for myself. That feeling of having my private life violated made a bitter lump form in my throat. I knew instantly that this was Stephanie's latest move to strip away my autonomy and my right to make my own decisions. I took a deep, grounding breath and forced myself to stay as calm as I possibly could. I invited her into my home, telling her I had absolutely nothing to hide, while I quietly tapped the record button on my phone and sent a quick signal to Sarah. The interrogation took place right there in my living room, in the heart of the home I worked so hard to keep. The agent started asking me these orientation and memory questions, the kind they usually reserve for someone struggling with dementia or Alzheimer's. I answered every single one of them clearly and accurately, detailing the daily operations of the 8 recovery centers I manage and listing off every medication and supplement I take, from my blood pressure pills to my daily vitamin D and fish oil. I could feel a slow, steady burn of outrage under my skin, but I refused to let it turn into an emotional outburst. I knew that was exactly the trap Stephanie had set for me, hoping I would look unstable or incapable of controlling my feelings. I looked the agent in the eye and asked her if she could tell me who had filed this report. When she hesitated, I reached over and pulled out the folder containing the evidence of Stephanie's fraud that I had found earlier. I explained that I was actually the one being subjected to emotional and financial abuse by my own future daughter-in-law. I showed her the contracts for the actors she hired and pointed out the high-definition security cameras I had installed to protect myself from her unwanted intrusions. I watched as the agent's expression shifted from professional skepticism to genuine surprise, and eventually to deep sympathy. She realized right then that she was being used as a pawn in a very dark and calculated game. Suddenly, Stephanie appeared at the door, pretending to be the most worried daughter-in-law in the world. She started crying out that I was getting agitated again and told the agent that I desperately needed to see the psychiatrist she had already made an appointment for. She even tried to step toward me to give me a hug, clearly trying to create the image of a devoted caregiver for the social worker to see. I took a very clear step back, keeping my distance and maintaining my dignity. I looked at her and the agent and told them I was refusing her doctor. I demanded an independent evaluation from a state hospital if it was truly necessary, proving that I was fully aware of my legal rights. My resilience left Stephanie completely stunned, her face turning pale with a mix of shock and pure rage, because she could not do a thing while an official witness was standing right there. The APS agent stood up and closed her file with a firm click. She looked at me and said that she found me to be completely lucid and possessing an incredible amount of self-control. She told me she would be recording this visit as a false report and would even suggest an investigation into harassment against the person who filed it. As they were leaving, Stephanie threw one last cold, threatening glare my way. I felt completely exhausted, but I also felt a deep sense of pride in myself. I had just survived one of the most disgusting attacks on my character and my honor. I realized I am so much stronger than I ever gave myself credit for, and that the truth really does have a way of protecting itself if you are brave enough to stand tall. The failure of her little mental health trap has pushed Stephanie into a corner. I know she is desperate now, and I can feel her preparing to play her very last card. Just 1 week after that social worker visit, I received a formal summons to appear in court. She has officially filed a lawsuit to try and take control of my estate and everything I have built. The final battle for my freedom and my legacy has officially begun. My dear sisters, have any of you ever had a relative use the excuse of being worried about your health just to try and control you or take away your freedom? It is such a subtle and cruel form of abuse that the world often ignores. What did you do to prove you were still sharp and to protect your own voice? Please share your thoughts with me, because every experience you have is a valuable lesson for all of us in this community. The lawyer's office was filled with heavy files today, stacked high like the walls of a fortress. I sat across from Mr. Miller, a man with decades of experience in family litigation and a steady hand. We went over every single piece of evidence we had gathered, the contract for the hired actors, the deceptive messages Stephanie had sent, and the final report from Adult Protective Services that cleared my name. Mr. Miller explained that Stephanie's legal team was trying to push a settlement offer on us. They said they would drop the lawsuit if I simply handed over half of my shares in the recovery centers to Tommy, which really meant giving her the power to manage them. I could only give a bitter smile at that. Even now, with the truth staring her in the face. She still refused to let go of her greed for the life I had built with my own two hands. I told him very clearly that I refused, and that there would be no compromise with a lie. I know Tommy is stuck in the middle of this, and his heart is breaking. But I also know that if I give in now, I will lose everything Robert and I worked for. If I surrender, Tommy will just become another one of her permanent victims. A strange and powerful sense of peace settled over me then. I found that the sharp anxiety I felt when I first got those court papers had vanished. I understood that this was not just a legal battle over property. It was a battle to affirm my own dignity as a woman who had fought her way out of the shadows. We spent hours rehearsing exactly what I would say when I stood before the judge. Mr. Miller reminded me over and over to keep my poise and stay calm, and not to let my emotions take over when their lawyer started questioning me. I focused on telling my story with logic and facts, from the sacrifices of my past to the betrayal I was facing now. Sarah was right there with us, double-checking all our financial records to make sure everything was 100% transparent and above board. The air in the room was serious, but it felt heavy with the weight of our careful preparation. That evening, I went home and took a slow walk through my flower garden. The scent of the roses and the damp Arizona earth helped me find my balance again. I looked up at the vast desert sky and the bright stars, making a silent promise to myself that I would not take a single step back. I was completely ready for this final battle. Everything was in its proper place and every piece of evidence was ready. I was just waiting for the moment when justice would finally be served. I could almost feel Robert smiling down at me, and I knew I would not let him down. Tomorrow, the curtain of lies would have to come down forever. The next morning, I put on my most professional suit and gripped my handbag tightly, the one that held my secret evidence. I stepped into the courthouse, where the halls felt cold and very solemn. Stephanie was standing there in a flashy outfit, but I could see a flickering look of worry in her eyes that she could not quite hide. The trial for the legacy of my family was about to begin. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop when Stephanie's lawyer began his opening statement. He started digging up every painful detail of my past struggle with addiction, trying to paint me as an unstable woman who was too old and fragile to manage her own estate. Stephanie sat there in the front row, holding a lace handkerchief to her eyes and pretending to cry, playing the part of the poor, mistreated daughter-in-law perfectly. I could feel a slow burn of anger rising in my chest, but I kept my back straight and my eyes fixed on the judge, remembering Mr. Miller's advice to keep my dignity through it all. I knew the truth was about to be laid bare for everyone to see. Then it was our turn. Mr. Miller stood up with a calm confidence and pulled out the secret weapon we had been holding, the formal contract for the actors hired to play Stephanie's parents. I heard a collective gasp ripple through the courtroom. The judge took the document and adjusted her glasses, leaning in to read every word with a deep frown on her face. Stephanie's face went from ghostly pale to a bright, angry red in a matter of seconds. We then presented the printed emails showing her detailed plan to seize control of my recovery centers once she had secured the marriage. Every single one of her shiny lies started to crumble like a sandcastle hit by a tidal wave of truth. When I was called to the witness stand, I did not talk about numbers or laws at first. I spoke about the 12 years of blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into my recovery and the legacy Robert and I had built together for our son. I looked Stephanie directly in the eye and told her that she had called me low class, but in reality, her own lies were the only thing that were truly inferior in that room. My voice was steady, and it echoed through the silent chamber with a weight she could not ignore. I looked over at Tommy, and saw him sitting there with his head in his hands, finally seeing the woman he had loved for the predator she really was. The sense of satisfaction I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced before. The judge finally brought her gavel down with a sharp crack that signaled the end of the game. She dismissed every single one of Stephanie's claims and reaffirmed my absolute right to own and manage every bit of my property and assets. She did not stop there, though. She gave Stephanie a stern, public rebuke for her fraudulent behavior and her calculated abuse of a senior citizen. She even recommended that the prosecutor's office look into filing criminal charges for financial fraud. Stephanie started screaming and crying as the court security officers led her out of the room, but her voice was quickly lost to the hallway. A massive weight that I had been carrying for weeks finally lifted off my shoulders, and I could finally take a full breath again. I walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, warm Arizona sun, feeling like I was stepping into a brand new life. Sarah and Martha were waiting right there to pull me into a tight hug and celebrate our victory. Tommy walked up to me then, his eyes red and his face full of regret, and he took my hand and asked for my forgiveness. I know it is going to take a long time for us to heal our relationship, but at least the truth has finally set us both free. I felt a sense of tranquility I have not known in a long time. Justice was served, and I had reclaimed my dignity while protecting Robert's legacy and my own future. The storm has finally passed, leaving behind a clear blue sky and a fresh start full of hope. After the trial, I spent a lot of time getting my life back in order. A brand new chapter is opening up for me now, one that is completely free from the shadows of deceit. I know exactly what I need to do to enjoy these peaceful years of my life, starting with changing my surroundings and picking up the passions I had set aside for so long. A few months after the courthouse doors closed behind me for the last time, I made the decision to sell that old house. It was a beautiful place, but it was just too full of those heavy, suffocating memories that I needed to leave behind. I moved into a smaller, lovely apartment that is just drenched in sunlight, located in a much quieter part of town. Now, instead of waking up with my stomach in knots over bills or the next cruel thing Stephanie might say, I spend my mornings tending to a small patch of roses and getting lost in my favorite stories on my Kindle. I am finally tasting what real freedom feels like, picking up those old hobbies and passions I had set aside for so long, just because I was too busy trying to keep everyone else happy. Tommy comes over all the time now. We spend our evenings in the kitchen, cooking together and actually talking to each other with honesty for the first time in years. Sometimes, I catch my reflection in the hallway mirror, and I just have to smile at the strong, resilient woman looking back at me. I finally understand that my worth is not found in the lies someone else tries to weave about me, but in the long, hard journey I have walked to get right here. To all of you listening out there, I want to share a piece of my heart with you. Please, never let your past or the bitter words of another person define who you are. We have spent our entire lives making sacrifices, building legacies, and pouring out our love for our families. Because of that, we deserve every bit of respect and all the peace this world has to offer. You have to trust that voice inside you, that gut instinct that tells you when something is not right. Do not be afraid to draw a hard line in the sand to protect the work of your hands and your own dignity. The truth might cut deep and cause some pain in the beginning, but I promise you it is the only medicine that can bring you lasting freedom. You have to learn to love yourself first before you go looking for anyone else to validate you. I pray that you stay strong and that you find the light of a new dawn waiting for you after whatever storm you might be walking through right now. Thank you for sharing this time with me. It means so much to have you here. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe and share it with a sister who needs to hear it. We are never alone when we stand together. Stay strong, keep your light shining, and stay blessed until next time.